Very well, Colin. Good to see you again.
Thank you. Yeah, well, this week we had a meeting of the sort of video working group.
Mm.
We had about 60 retailers join the call to hear you talk about your new research on the use of body-worn cameras in retail. So a huge level of interest from across the world.
Mhm.
A lot of American retailers on there, and many British retailers, of course, and European. So really, really interesting set of retailers on to listen to what you had to say. Um, the report is available to download from the website, but perhaps just to give a flavour of what is in the report, maybe two or three key takeaways or questions that you need to think about as a retailer on this particular technology.
Yes, it's really great to get this out there. It's taken me about a year to do this research, and it's really it grew out of growing concern, I think, amongst the retail community about problems related to violence and verbal abuse that their staff have been experiencing, and also concerns about rising levels of retail crime, which has been hitting the headlines around the world for, well, probably the last 12 months now. So what retailers are asking for is should we be investing in body worn cameras? What can they do for us? And have they got value to try and deal with some of these issues? And in some countries, they've been in use for quite a while, haven't they? Certainly in the United Kingdom, then there's been a number of retailers who've been using them for several years now. Whereas in other countries, they simply haven't been used. And we're seeing in the USA, for instance, growing interest, but still some concerns around privacy around their use. And then in other countries, they're not being used at all. So my research was just trying to understand how people have been using them and what the potential value might be. And I think what the research generally found was that retailers are investing in this technology primarily to try and deter people who are likely to commit violence and verbal abuse, and also to try and de-escalate those situations. So, the idea is that the camera makes a much more visible representation of the risk amplification idea, which is, look, if you continue to be verbally abusing me, to be threatening and threatening behaviour, then I'm going to turn this camera on and I'm going to record you. And we know from other research that when that tends to happen for quite a lot of people, it tends to amplify their sense of awareness, and and it begins to de-escalate situations in some circumstances. So that
Yeah,
was a
your
really
report.
big.
Yeah, and your report was really good about bringing out that it's not every type of offender
No.
is going to be deterred by this. I thought that was a really important point.
Yeah, and that's right. It's one of these things we've often talked about, isn't it? Which is there is not one panacea that's going to fix all the problems of retail crime and loss. I mean, people have often tried to sell them, but sadly, what you require is a whole, a multitude of ways in which you deal with, a multitude of problems. And so the research was really just what it found was that body worn cameras, generally can have an effect upon de-escalating incidents. The other big finding, I think, was that it generally makes staff feel safer when they're wearing them. They feel as though the company's investing in their well-being by giving them these cameras. And when they're linked to a centralized hub, often they then get that added reassurance that people are listening in and can potentially be calling the police on their behalf if things are getting out of control. And then the third reason was around, it can actually begin to help gather evidence, although it wasn't you being used that much compared to the other two reasons I mentioned. But certainly for some types of offenders, the organised retail crime gangs, very serial repeat offenders, then we know that it's very difficult to put those people off, and therefore it may be just a question of gathering sufficient evidence to then go to the police to hopefully get them prosecuted in the future. So, I came away, and the sort of the generalised results was that body worn cameras certainly have a role to play in perhaps the higher risk stores, as long as they're part of a broader suite of interventions. They won't just work on their own. That stores that are at risk of crime and of violence and verbal abuse, that staff need to have stores that are well designed, that the staff need to be well trained, that they need to be able to communicate with each other, and that the strategy within the organisation as a whole needs to take account of the risk landscape. And so for some stores, you won't need these because the risk of violence and verbal abuse is very low. But for other high risk areas, the research was generally very positive to say that used in the right way and within the right context, then body worn cameras seem to have a pretty good role to play.
Yeah, we heard about lone workers, didn't we? We heard about van drivers as well. But what was interesting about the meeting, it wasn't a sort of slam dunk, that everyone, we had extremes. We had one retailer just saying this is the best thing they've ever done, more or less. But then the other was sort of like, oh, a bit more tentative, I'm not really sure about this. One retailer did a study of 800 staff members and found only 50% of them actually wanted to have the body worn cameras. So it's not a sort of it's not something you can go ahead and do without giving it a lot of thought, I suppose, is the message from this. This needs to be really thought through all the way up and across the organisation.
Yes, as I say, it should be part of a broader strategy. We want to get away from the days where somebody's just looking for the widget that will fix loss. And actually, for some staff they don't want to wear it, and again you have to think about that in terms of the broader organizational culture, which is, do we want these cameras in our stores? How will customers feel about this, and how will staff feel about wearing them? Certainly retail staff in particular. I found some examples where where retailers were only putting it in their highest risk stores, and sometimes only putting in there for a while, and staff felt reassured by that. And then the rates of use went down, and they decided to take them out and move them elsewhere. So I think you're right. I think it's about making sure that if you are going to invest in them, that you invest in them wisely, and you think through how they're going to be used and in what circumstances. And when you do that, it's like a lot of interventions we see in retailing. If you do think it through, then you'll probably get some good results from it.
Yeah, as you said, there's quite a few forks in the road as well. Does it have a camera? Does it have an image facing out? How do you attach it to the uniform? And that seemed to be quite important as well, because often they can be dangling in the wrong place.
Yeah,
So there's important choices to be made there. But some of the headline numbers, I mean, it was really good that you showed or shared the results from that mass transit. Was it like 47% reduction in incidents when it was used in lots of train stations versus not lots of train stations? I sense that the robustness of the data from the retailers you were able to gather wasn't as strong, but were there some numbers that people can sort of take away and think, well, if I did this, it's a X% reduction in incidents?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it was challenging getting sort of hard quantitative data that was built upon robust methodologies, and it's an age-old problem we've had within our world of retail research. Is retailers are not data collectors; they're retailers. That's their job. Their job is to sell products and keep customers happy, and make a profit. My job as an academic and a researcher is to try and get really robust methodologies and data that I feel confident is giving me a representation of the truth. So some were able to share numbers around how they try to measure, particularly reductions in levels of violence and verbal abuse, which is obviously one of the key measures you could have with body-worn cameras. And on average, those who were able to share said that they'd seen a reduction of about 37% in the number of incidents, and it ranged from around 13% to as high as 70% nearly. But the underlying numbers were very small. You're looking at shifts of numbers from, for instance, from 12 to 5 in the number of incidents underlying it. So you've got to be very careful of the problem.
If only there were more incidents, yeah?
Yeah, that's right, yes.
Says the academic.
But where retailers were a little bit stronger was when they'd done perception surveys of staff who were using them, and because that's easier data to collect in some respects. And what we found there was that generally staff do feel safer when they're using these, when they're wearing these cameras. It's like a comfort blanket, but there's this sense that that it gives them a sense that the company's taking their problems seriously, and look, we're investing in your security. I think the big thing about this, because you and I know that video technologies have been around retailing for 50 years now. I mean, this is not a new technology, video, and actually its overall impact has been really quite modest in terms of reducing retail crime and loss. You can see the numbers are going up, and yet every retail store's got lots and lots of video technologies in there. And I think this really speaks to the issue of what we call dosage, which is people are now so familiar with video in stores that they don't see it anymore. They don't recognize it. And therefore, it doesn't have that deterrent impact because it's just part of the wallpaper of retailing. And I think what body-worn cameras are very good at is really amplifying that sense of dosage. It's there. It's on the chest of the person who you're now shouting at. And you can see that it's going to begin to record you if they press that button, and you see your face on there. So I think that's where we're seeing the big difference here, is this sense of increasing the dosage capability of video. We see it, of course, with the use of, when we see it with public display monitors, don't we? The reason why retailers are doing that is saying, hello, customer, look, you're on video. Look, you can see this, because they recognize having a camera on the ceiling is now just lost in the fog of, of technology within retail stores. So I think that's one of the powerful things, is it increases that sense of dosage.
Yeah, no, I like that. And going back to the staff point, I asked my wife last night whether she would use it, and she said, "Yeah, I would. At least if I get beaten up or whatever, then at least there'll be a record of it."
Yeah.
So I think it's quite convincing from the staff perspective. So if you're not an academic, Adrian, you'd be suddenly turned into a vice president of loss prevention for a big retailer. What would you do? Would you be looking at this?
I would. I certainly would be looking to use them. Certainly, I'd probably make it mandatory for my security staff to wear them now. And I would be looking to offer it as, a way to help staff who are working in the highest risk stores.
Or on their own or whatever, on
Yeah.
bands or yeah. Okay,
But
perfect.
targeted, very targeted, yeah.
Very targeted. And you'd think it's, yeah, oh, very good. Well, look, thank you for that. The report, as I said, is available to download and get hold of. It's a great report
Thank
and
you.
a really valuable contribution to this technology. So big thanks, and we will see you next time.
Cheers, Colin. Bye-bye.
Right.